Spiritual disconnection doesn't always look dramatic. It's not always a full-on crisis of faith or a sudden collapse. Most of the time, it starts slow. Maybe you stop feeling inspired. The practices that once grounded you start to feel distant. You go through the motions, but something in your heart feels unplugged. You might not even know how to name it at first, but you start to notice that you're always tired even when you're rested. You feel numb doing things that used to bring you joy. Your trust in yourself, or in something greater, starts to feel shaky. And there's this heaviness inside that's really hard to explain. Spiritual disconnection is when you no longer feel connected to your why, to meaning, to purpose, to your own soul. And often it shows up not just in your emotions, but in your nervous system. For some, spirituality is deeply rooted in faith, in a relationship with God or a higher power. And for others, it's more about intuition, ancestral connection, a sense of presence in nature, or knowing that they are a part of something that is bigger than their thoughts. And I'm not trying to say that there's a right or a wrong way to define a spiritual connection. What matters is that it helps you feel held, anchored, and supported. And when that connection starts to fade, you don't just feel lost emotionally, your body notices that and it responds. Because your spirit and your physiology are very deeply woven together. So when you lose that sense of inner connection, whether it's to your faith, to your intuition, or to your own self-worth, your nervous system starts shifting into protection mode. Your body doesn't wait for you to consciously understand what's happening. It reacts, and then it braces, and then it begins to conserve energy. So you're no longer operating from a place of safety and openness, you are surviving. And here's how that can show up physiologically. You start to lose nervous system flexibility. One of the first things that shifts is vagal tone. And vagal tone affects your ability to move between stressed states and calm states. So when that vagal tone is healthy, you can bounce back. You can navigate life stressors. You can still return to baseline. But when you feel disconnected on a spiritual level, your vagal tone can drop. And that means that it becomes harder for you to calm down. Even when things are quiet, your body might stay stuck in that high alert mode or collapse into a freeze state. You might feel restless, you might feel shut down or frozen. Even when nothing is seemingly wrong, you just can't quite land. Oxytocin levels may drop. And if you don't already know, oxytocin is a hormone that supports trust, bonding, and emotional safety. It is a part of what helps us feel connected to others and to the divine. And when you're spiritually disconnected, that oxytocin lowers. You might withdraw, you might struggle to feel safe around others, you might feel disconnected from yourself, or even depressed and anxious. And without that sense of bonding, even soothing things like prayer, music, or comforting touch can feel hollow. Your ability to recover weakens. So your heart rate variability, or HRV, is a reflection of how well your body can shift between states. So when your HRV is low, your nervous system gets stuck in stress. Spiritual disconnection can contribute to this. Your resilience shrinks. You feel like you can't keep up. The small things start to feel like big things. And everything just takes more out of you. And you might not even feel stressed. You just feel flat, heavy, and dull. Your energy can start to drain in quiet and invisible ways. And this one's one of the most confusing for people because you're probably doing everything right. You're eating well, you're taking supplements or medications, you're getting to bed on time, and you still feel like you're running on fumes. Your cortisol rhythm, which controls your natural energy curve, may have flattened. And that can look like feeling groggy in the mornings, moving throughout your day in a haze, catching a second wind at bedtime, or being physically still but internally tense. And because it doesn't show up on a lab test or a tracker like normal lab tests anyway, it's easy to internalize the message that you're just not doing enough. But you are. Your body's just working overtime to navigate that disconnect. You also stop trusting your inner compass. So when you're disconnected spiritually, decision making becomes hard. You doubt yourself more, you second guess your intuition, you lose your sense of internal direction. And this can show up as overanalyzing small choices, feeling like there's no right answer, relying on external input more than internal guidance, or feeling unmotivated, unclear, and scattered. And it's not because you're indecisive, it's because your body isn't grounded in meaning. And without that deep anchor, even the simplest steps can feel shaky. Emotions can feel either too much or completely muted. So another thing that can happen when you are spiritually disconnected is emotional dysregulation. So you might find yourself crying unexpectedly, snapping at loved ones, feeling irrationally overwhelmed, or maybe you swing to the opposite end of the spectrum and feel nothing at all. You might go days without feeling joy or sadness, maybe just feeling blank. And this is often your body's way of protecting you from feeling too much in a state where you don't feel supported or held. And you're not emotionally broken. Your system is on pause. It is waiting to feel safe again. Now, sometimes the exhaustion isn't just about your to-do list. Sometimes it's about this deeper kind of tired where your body and your spirit feel out of sync. And that can look like, hey, I don't feel like myself anymore. Maybe you can't quite put your finger on what's wrong. You just know something is off. You feel disconnected from your inner compass. The things that used to feel meaningful just feel empty, hollow, and blurry. You might have this dull, lingering ache. For some people, it leaves a lot of pain. It can live behind your eyes. It can live in your chest, in your gut, in your low back. This heaviness, this tension, this invisible weight or pain, this discomfort. Restlessness that doesn't go away with rest. You sleep, but it's not refreshing. You take a break, but you still feel agitated and irritable. You feel like you're always on the inside, like your soul is pacing the room even when your body is still. There's overwhelm over the small things. So choosing what to eat, replying to a message, deciding what to do with your afternoon, all feels like too much. And it's not because you're incapable, it's because when you're spiritually untethered, every decision feels like it's being made without an anchor. You're floating, you're ungrounded, you're unclear. It can feel like you're just getting through the day, right? You're surviving, you're checking boxes, you're showing up, but you're not inhabiting your life. You're not living, right? You're going through the motions, hoping that something shifts. And sometimes spiritual disconnection can show up not just in how we feel, but in what we avoid, right? So avoiding spiritual practices that you used to love, right? Maybe you haven't opened your journal in months, or you've avoided praying because it feels hollow, or you stopped meditating because it made you feel things that you weren't ready to feel. And there's no shame here, right? This is your body's way of self-protecting, but it's also a clue, it's a message. You might have shame about not doing healing right. You might think, well, I should be further along by now, or why don't I feel anything when I meditate anymore? What if I'm the only one who can't access peace? And this shame isn't proof that you're failing, right? This that you're feeling is a side effect of that spiritual disconnection, of trying to heal from a place of disconnect instead of support. You might find yourself constantly searching for answers that never quite land. So you're binging podcasts, you're reading all the books, you're signing up for every single healing workshop, but nothing is sticking, right? Nothing is sinking in. And it's not because you're resistant, it's because your system is craving that rootedness, not more information. Maybe you have envy of people who seem spiritually aligned. And this one is a hard one to admit sometimes. You might feel this quiet ache when someone else talks about their connection to God or their spiritual practice. And you want that ease, that peace, that knowing, that steadiness and comfort. But instead of feeling inspired, you start to feel like something must be wrong with you. And nothing's wrong with you. You're just hungry for connection, and that is holy. Identifying with survival more than hope. So when you've been in a chronic illness or you've been stressed for a really long time, it's easy to start building your identity around it. Building that identity around coping, around managing. And when you try to step in to possibility, into healing, into joy, you might feel a lot of resistance, like you're betraying something. And that too is a sign of spiritual disconnection, of forgetting that you are more than what you've been through. You may have found yourself saying things like, I just don't feel like myself. I used to feel something when I prayed. I'm tired, but not just physically. It's like something inside of me is worn out. And I want to reconnect, but I don't know how. These are signals, subtle calls from both your body and your deeper self. It's not evidence that you're broken or failing, but invitations to listen, right? Your soul's not gone. God's not gone. It's just gone quiet. And right now it might be asking to be felt again. Now, let's gently start to explore what happens in your body when you are spiritually disconnected. Now, this isn't about memorizing a lot of anatomy or science. I want to give you real changes that are happening in your biology when your spirit feels far away, but I want it to be easy for you to understand. Because spiritual disconnection isn't imaginary and it does affect your body. It's not just emotional, it's not just spiritual. It shows up in your nervous system, it shows up in your endocrine system, your hormones, and even the way that your cells regulate energy and rest. Your body knows when something sacred is missing, even if you can't quite explain what it is. That survival mode isn't always loud, sometimes it's silent. So when you feel cut off from connection, whether that's cut off from God, cut off from your purpose, your intuition, or even your own inner knowing, your body shifts into that survival mode. But it's not always the more dramatic kind. It's oftentimes the quieter version, right? It's not running and fighting. It's bracing, withdrawing, waiting. Because your nervous system realizes or thinks that loss of connection feels unsafe. It's unstable. Like the ground beneath you isn't solid. You don't have that solid foundation. And from there, a few things start to shift, right? We have that reduced vagal tone. So your vagus nerve is a key communicator between your brain and your body. And I touched on this earlier, but I want to go a little deeper. Your vagus nerve helps to regulate your heart. It regulates your digestion, your breath, and your stress response. And when vagal tone is healthy, like we mentioned earlier, you can shift easily between that action and rest. You can feel that tension for a short while, and then you return to a calm state. But in the presence of ongoing spiritual disconnection, that vagal tone can weaken more and more over time. And that end result means it's going to be harder to shift out of stress, even if you want to. You're going to feel wired and tired. You're going to feel really foggy in the morning, emotionally flat, reactive. Your heart rate's probably going to be higher. You might struggle with a lot of chronic constipation, shortness of breath, anxiety. You're not overreacting to these things. Your system isn't resetting and feeling safe the way that it used to. Oxytocin can lower. So oxytocin, like we mentioned, helps you feel bonded, soothed, and safe. And it's released when you hug someone that you trust, when you cry on a loved one's shoulder, or you experience moments of deep prayer. But when we're disconnected spiritually, even if there has been, little t trauma or big T trauma, maybe really big grief that's going on, those oxytocin levels can absolutely plummet. And then you start avoiding that closeness. You pull back from community and you feel like no one really understands you. And it's not because you're cold, it's because your system doesn't feel safe enough to interact with others. It doesn't feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to open up, to soften. And your cortisol curve can flatten. Now, we touched on this as well earlier, but cortisol is your body's rhythm keeper. It rises in the morning to help you wake up and then starts to lower throughout the day to help you fall asleep and rest. When you are disconnected or that disconnect drags on, your cortisol curve flattens. Right? That rhythm disappears. Everything starts to blur. Your body doesn't know what is up, what is down, when to wake up, when to go to sleep. You struggle to get out of bed. You feel wired and tired. As soon as your head hits the pillow, you get a lot of anxiety or racing thoughts. You might experience random energy crashes throughout the day or random bursts of energy, and then you lose your natural sense of timing or flow. This is dysregulation. This is often driven by spiritual disconnect. So, what are some of the root causes? What leads us here in the first place? Because if you are feeling spiritually disconnected, it's not just because you let go of something and you should have held on tighter, right? It's not because you aren't trying hard enough. It's often the exact opposite. So, spiritual disconnection usually doesn't start with apathy, it starts with pain. It starts with heartbreak, with disappointment, with trying so hard for so long and still not feeling safe and held, still not feeling seen. So let's walk through some of the most common roots that I see, not necessarily to diagnose or to label, but to name and acknowledge what is often invisible for a very long time. So let's start with the medical trauma or gaslighting, because this is very common with women that I work with those of us who have invisible chronic illnesses. So maybe you've gone from doctor to doctor, you have tried explaining that something feels off, and instead of help, you got dismissal. You got eye rolls or silence, right? Maybe they told you your labs were fine, they're normal, go home, even though you could not get out of bed. Maybe they said that your pain was stress related while your body is screaming for support, which I'm not going to fully disagree here. However, I do think that there's more to it, but stress is a huge key factor. Maybe you even started to wonder if it was all in your head because the people meant to help you couldn't seem to see you. And that kind of experience creates a deep rupture in trust, right? Not just trust in the system, but in yourself, in your body, in your intuition, in your own worthiness of care. And when that trust breaks, spiritual disconnection usually isn't far behind, because how can you feel connected to something bigger, whether it's God, your soul, or your purpose, when you can't even feel safe inside your own skin? Another root that I often see is unresolved grief, especially grief that was never witnessed, held, or honored. So this could be the death of a loved one, it could be a breakup, a miscarriage, a life that you thought you would have, maybe even a version of yourself that you had to leave behind. Even spiritual grief, like when you prayed and nothing changed, or things got worse. Or when you felt abandoned by the very source that once gave you comfort. If your grief wasn't allowed space to breathe, if it was rushed, if it was invalidated or buried, it often lodges in the body. And that weight can cut off your connection to what is sacred. Not because you're ungrateful, not because you're undeserving, but because there's still something inside of you that hasn't been fully held. And without that holding, it's hard to open. If you grew up with praise for being the good one, the strong one, the helpful one, you probably learned early on that love was something that you had to earn. And you were only safe, accepted, or lovable if you were achieving, if you were pleasing, if you were pushing through. And that kind of conditioning seeps so deeply into your nervous system, and it makes the rest feel like failure. It makes stillness feel unsafe, and it turns spiritual practice into just another checkbox on your to-do list. And eventually your soul gets crowded out, not necessarily intentionally, but quietly and slowly, until one day you realize that you haven't felt sacred in a long time because you have been too busy trying to be enough. If you were also raised in a religious household or tradition that used fear or shame or punishment as tools for control, you may have learned to associate the sacred with something that is heavy. Maybe you were taught that questioning meant rebellion. Maybe you were told that your body or your emotions or your intuition couldn't be trusted. Maybe you were praised when you ignored your needs for the glory of God and shamed when you chose rest or boundaries. Religious trauma doesn't always mean abuse, right? Sometimes it's more subtle than that. Sometimes it's being taught that God only loves a certain version of you. He only loves you if you're obedient. So when you're broke, when your body isn't fully functioning, when you're doubting, when you stop being able to perform the right way, you felt disconnected. Not just from the church, not just from family, from friends, but from God, from hope, from yourself, right? And that disconnection is sacred too, because it's often the first step towards rebuilding a truer kind of faith. And when you've been sick for a really long time, especially when people around you don't understand, that can start to feel like spiritual exile, right? You start to wonder if your body's betraying you, if you're being punished, or if you're just too much. You start to pull away, you stop reaching out, you stop trusting that healing is possible. And slowly your world gets smaller. That hope gets quieter, God feels further away. And this isn't because you're negative, it's because illness is isolating. And when no one is speaking life over your body anymore, not even yourself, your soul starts to dim. Hyperindependence as a trauma response is another root that I don't hear a lot of people talking about, but it is in almost every burned out woman that I have spoken with. And when you've been let down enough times, when you've had to hold it all together alone for years, your nervous system decides that it is safer to not need anyone at all. It's safer to not need help. It's safer to not be soft. It is safer to not surrender. Just figure it out yourself. Take care of yourself. And while that kind of independence may have helped you survive, it also cuts off the exact thing that would bring you back to life, which is receptivity, receiving, right? Because when you cannot receive, you cannot feel spiritually connected because you're bracing. You're bracing for that disappointment. You're bracing for that betrayal. You're bracing for the moment that help doesn't show up. And that kind of vigilance is blocking everything. It's blocking love, peace, presence, your connection to God. So when we start to trace these roots down even deeper, we often find things like you learned, whether it was consciously or not, that it wasn't safe to rely on anything outside of yourself. You internalized that your needs were too much or they weren't spiritual enough. And you became the caretaker, right? The strong one, the backbone, the skeptic, or the achiever, disconnected from receiving. And then you adapted brilliantly. Right? You kept going, you built a life, you did your best, but in the process, something sacred got buried. And now maybe your body is asking for its return. But the good news, the really, really good news is that when you start to reconnect, softly, slowly, and safely, your body notices. Not necessarily in a dramatic overnight way, but in a quiet, soul-deep way that feels like exhaling for the first time in years, right? Your oxytocin starts to rise. We talked about that being low when we're disconnected. It starts to flow again. You feel more at ease. You feel more trusting, more open to connection. Your vagal tone improves, which means you start bouncing back more easily. You move from that stress state to the rest state without getting stuck. You can take a nap without feeling guilty or anxious or shameful for sitting down for 10 minutes. Your constipation improves and you're not constipated for weeks or even a month at a time, right? You're sleeping deeper. You're starting to feel again physically, to feel again emotionally. And your heart rate variability increases, right? Your nervous system's more flexible, it's more responsive, it's resilient. You're able to do more, to be more, to have more fun, to go to more places if you want. You're less overwhelmed by the little things, and your system isn't running on fumes. And then you start to trust yourself again, right? Your intuition gets clearer. Your sense of purpose feels closer. You start to believe that healing is possible, not because someone told you to, but because your body is finally feeling it. And most of all, your energy starts to return. Not in a I'm bouncing out of bed first thing in the morning kind of way, but in a steady, sustainable, soulful way. You wake with more clarity. You handle hard moments with more grace. Your emotions flow instead of bottling them up. You're letting people in just a little bit. You find joy in those tiny moments. That is the power of spiritual reconnection. It's not bypassing the body. It restores it. So there are a few gentle ways that you can reconnect spiritually, mind, body, and spirit. So one of the first ones that I have a lot of my clients do is a visualization technique. So when your soul feels really far away and your body is carrying all of that disconnect, it's bracing, there's tension, you feel like you have to hold everything together. This visualization helps you to feel what it's like to be held, to surrender, to receive. So the pressure signals safety to your nervous system, and the imagery reminds you that you are not separate from creation, you are a part of it, which means you are also linked with God. It roots you into something alive, something bigger than your anxiety. And all you have to do is lie down or sit down, have a weighted blanket or a weighted pillow on your stomach, and just picture yourself lying on this forest floor. You're deep in the woods, tall trees shading you. It's soft, it's damp, it's warm, it's quiet. Everything is still. And imagine everything. Use all of your senses. Picture how the moss feels or the grass feels underneath you. Picture how the trees look. What are you smelling? Can you smell the earth? And feel it holding you. Feel it grounding you, supporting you. And every time you exhale, sink deeper and deeper into that forest floor. A shower can be a very simple one too, right? When you feel completely out of sync, you're feeling frazzled, foggy, you feel like you're about to crawl out of your skin, go take a shower if you can, right? If you're in a position where you can, right? If you're home or something. But instead of just zoning out in the shower, you can make it a ritual, right? While the water is running, you can try some breathing exercises or let your body rock from side to side or back and forth. You can do butterfly taps, cross your arms over your chest, one hand on each shoulder, and just tap, alternating each tap. Right? Water is naturally regulating for our nervous system. We talk about it being spiritually cleansing, but it is physically cleansing too. It stimulates our skin. It helps regulate the temperature. It signals to the brain that it's time to relax, time to wind down. And adding in the bilateral stimulation, the taps that we were talking about, helps to use both sides of your brain to integrate that emotional stress that you're experiencing. So both together can further reduce cortisol levels and bring your body back to baseline, into that window of tolerance where your system feels steady and grounded. And the last one is where we take into account and acknowledge these micro moments. So, this one is for when you feel like nothing is working. Your spiritual practices feel empty, you feel gray, you don't know what to do, you're disconnected. Grab a notebook or open your phone's voice memo one time a day. I don't care what time it is, whenever you get the moment, and take 60 seconds and just note one thing down that felt warm, grounding, or comforting to you. Something small. Maybe it was the sound of the birds outside. Maybe it was the sun hitting your skin for a few seconds. Maybe it was a line in a song that made your heart crack open a bit. And you don't have to interpret it, just name it, just acknowledge it. So your brain has something called the reticular activating system, and it filters what you pay attention to based on what it thinks is important. So if your brain is stuck on survival mode, it's scanning for stress. It's scanning for danger, for failure, all of the bad things, right? And this practice gently retrains it to scan for connection, to scan for clarity, for joy, for beauty, for things that it really resonates with, for those little whispers of something deeper. And over time, you start to notice more of these moments because your brain is now looking for the positive. So if you've been stuck in fatigue and exhaustion and nothing seems to help, it might not mean that you're doing something wrong. It might mean that your system is spiritually disconnected from what gives it meaning, safety, support, and purpose. Spiritual disconnection doesn't happen because you're weak. It happens when you've been in survival mode for too long, and your body starts to try and protect you from feeling anything. And that includes God, that includes a spiritual connection, that includes your intuition and purpose. And that's not a failure. That is your system doing beautifully what it was designed to do. But the longer that shutdown lasts, the more it can feel like you're numb, lost, or going through the motions. So if any of this sounds like you and you want support, real support from someone who has been through it, someone who understands how this works on a mental, physical, and spiritual level, I would love to be of service, whether that is through our Healing Code program or our community space in the garden or a one-on-one session. Just know that you are not in this alone, and you can find further information in our description below.